Well, hey, everybody, we are excited for week number 3 of our series in your new playlist as we talk about something that is really important to all of us. Now, when we use the word playlist, chances are you probably think of a musical playlist. And we're not talking about running through your top Spotify playlist for the year, even though part of me would like to know what's on your playlist. But it's about tapping into a superpower of a God-honoring mindset and choosing wisdom when it comes to your thoughts every single day. Now, I don't know about you, but I need a little bit of help from time to time, especially when things start to get a little bit off. Let me give you an example. For many of you, maybe you've heard of the movie, or maybe you've even seen the movie Jaws that came out several years ago. And even though it came out before I was born, I remember watching it when I was a child. Now, obviously, this was an absolute terrifying movie about a shark, but especially frightening for me when I watched it because I was a child. Now, I don't remember what exactly it was that traumatized me so much, because there was a shark in the movie that was doing all kinds of things that a shark in real life wouldn't really do. But I didn't know that as a kid. And so as I watched this, I began to get more and more afraid of getting into the water. And I also didn't know that sharks only existed in the ocean. So there was a reservoir that was near our house, and many of us would go there to go swimming or tubing or boating or whatever. And as we would go out on this reservoir, you couldn't see the bottom. And I remember I spent a lot of my time as a child being terrified that at any point Jaws was going to come up out of the reservoir and eat me as a tasty snack. Now, what about you? Chances are when you were a kid, you had things that you were most afraid of. And so what were some of those things? I want you just to take a moment, and I want you to think about what are some of the things that you were most afraid of as a kid. Because the reality is we all know that there are things that we've been afraid of, and we all know what it's like to be afraid of something. But have you ever wondered if there's a way to get over your fears? If there's a way to never be controlled by fear again? In the words of the great poet Taylor Swift, can we actually be fearless?
Take my hand and drive me head first, fearless.
I'm not so sure that fear is ever something that we can get completely rid of. Some fears are probably not the same now that they were when you were a child. You may not be scared of things like clowns or bugs or balloons anymore, but that doesn't mean that your fears are gone altogether. You see, for most of us, here's the thing. These old, silly fears, they get replaced with new, bigger fears as we grow up. And these fears tend to come in different forms. Instead of worrying about things like bugs or clowns, we find ourselves worrying about passing our unit test in math, or worrying about a parent who may be losing their job, or being excluded from a friends group. Now, here's the thing, is so many of us, we pretend to be fearless. We try to walk like fear isn't real. And if it is real, we act like, well, it's not really that big of a deal. But here's the thing, is we know that that's just an act. That while we might be really good at pretending to be fearless some of the time, the reality is none of us can actually escape fear. You see, the more we try, the harder it gets to escape it. And while you can ignore it for a little bit, the reality is, and you may even try to say, well, it's just nothing, or you attempt to push through it. But the thing is fear is actually going to continue to show back up. And just like that, it becomes all that you think about, all that you hear, and all that you feel. Now, fear has a way of changing the playlist in our minds. Because when we let fear take over our thoughts, we get stuck wondering a question. And the question is this: what if? What if I don't make friends? What if my parents get divorced? What if I don't, get into the high school that I want to attend? Or what if my loved one doesn't get better? Or what if no one asks me to the dance? You see, this is difficult because sometimes fear can be helpful. Sometimes the what if questions can help us avoid or even be careful around things that could hurt us. And that's not a bad thing at all. But the problem comes when we let fear take over. when it determines our actions and our thoughts and our lives, when it holds us back from trying new things or discovering good things, that's when we need to figure out, how do I create a new playlist? You see, one of the best things about the Bible is that it gives us examples of real people who had real experiences and real feelings just like you and I do. And some of Jesus' closest followers actually experienced something with him that taught them a lot about how to deal with fear. And I think it can do the same for you and I today. You see, while on earth, Jesus spent most of his time with a group of 12 guys. And they were 12 of his closest friends. And because they spent so much time with Jesus, they saw him do some pretty amazing things. They saw him heal sick people, forgive sins, perform miracles. In other words, they got to be firsthand eyewitnesses to all the really cool stuff that he did. And you'd think that since these guys were Jesus' closest friends, they wouldn't be afraid of anything, right? After all, they were hanging out with the guy who had the power to do literally anything. So what could they possibly be afraid of when they have Jesus by their side? Well, let me tell you a quick story from Scripture. It happens this way, that one night, while all of these individuals, these closest friends of Jesus and Jesus himself, are traveling on a boat, and a huge storm rolls in. And the waves were so high, they were literally sweeping over the boat. Now, this isn't just like a normal rainstorm. Like, this is like the boat is about ready to capsize. And I mean, can you even imagine this? And in the middle of this insane storm on a tiny boat, these guys did exactly what I think you and I would do in this same situation. They looked for Jesus. They looked for the guy who could literally do anything to calm their fears. And here's what happens. In Matthew 8, it tells us, suddenly a ferocious storm came upon the lake. So the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. And the disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. So in this moment of absolute chaos and fear, what was Jesus doing? He was taking a nap. And obviously the disciples were afraid. They were in the middle of the water, riding out a major storm. And the one person who could actually do anything or help them in this moment was asleep and resting his eyes while the waves were crashing in all around them. And when they finally get Jesus awake, they probably thought, okay, in this moment, he's going to save us. And a spoiler alert, he does, but first he had something to say to them. He continues on and it says, he replied, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up and he rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? That even the winds and waves obey him. Now, while I can be sure, and here's the thing, I really can't be sure because obviously I wasn't there. But I don't think Jesus said to the disciples, hey, you of little faith, because he was upset with them. I don't think he was trying to make them feel bad for not having enough faith that they'd be safe. I think he was trying to show them that even when you're afraid, their faith, and hopefully your faith, is in the one who's bigger than anything that you might be afraid of. In other words, your faith in the one who is bigger than anything is bigger than the fear that's stronger, louder, and there. You know, here's the thing, is he was there to help them face their fears. Now, yes, Jesus calmed the storm. And not only the one raging on the waters, but Jesus calmed the storm in his followers. He calmed their fears, not just by stopping the wind and the waves, but by showing them that fear doesn't get the final vote. Jesus does. Now, did these disciples have a reason to be afraid? Yeah, of course they did. They were on the water in a boat in the middle of a huge storm, and that's terrifying. But Jesus wanted them to know that their fear didn't have to be the only thing that they felt. It didn't have to be the only voice that they listened to on the water. It didn't have to be the only song playing on their playlist. And Jesus' voice and presence could play even louder. You see, with Jesus, we can turn the volume down on our fear. You could say it this way, that you control the volume on fear. And while we may not be facing a literal storm at sea, we've all experienced fear. We felt afraid and alone and out of control, just like the disciples did in the boat at that moment. And in the same way that Jesus was with them, he's with you and I today. So we can trust him in the middle of a storm. We can turn to his presence and we can turn to his power even when we're afraid. And when we do, we control the volume on fear. Now, will we still have reasons to be afraid? Of course we will. That's a part of life. And I'm not saying that following Jesus means you'll never fear again. But I am saying that following Jesus can help you walk through your fear. It can help you turn the volume down on your fear every single day. Now think of it this way, that we all know of volume buttons on our phone or TV or tablet that make the volume louder or softer. And we know that we also have the power not only to change the volume level, we also have the power to mute the volume or to turn it off completely by using this. Yeah, it's a mute button. And we might feel the same way when we're afraid. That we just want to hit that mute button when we're afraid because we want to turn off the fear. But remember what we said earlier, is sometimes fear can be helpful. It can help us be alert or be safe. And if we just hit the mute button and we never feel fear, we'd likely end up in some situations that might be harmful to us because we've ignored it entirely. But instead, what if we thought about fear on a volume scale, like you see here? You see, a volume scale doesn't mute it completely, but it can turn it up and it can turn it down. And when we turn the volume down on fear, we're just simply not giving it the loudest voice. Because when fear takes over your thoughts, like an annoying song that's stuck in your mind on repeat, you can turn the volume down. You control the volume on fear. Now, yes, hard things are still going to show up, and things are going to happen that are scary, and fear will creep in and hang out. And you might not be able to turn it off all the way, but you can turn it down because you control the volume on fear. So how do you do this? Well, one way to do this is to focus on what's true. So instead of letting your mind wander to a million what ifs, you can focus on what is. You can focus on the truth that we find in Scripture that reminds us of the God who's with us and for us whenever we experience fear. Take this psalm, for example, Psalm 23. It says, "Even when I walk through the darkest valleys, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me." Focus on that for just a second. When we walk through dark times, we don't have to be afraid because God is with us. And I don't know about you, but when I find myself feeling afraid, that's a truth that I want to remember. And so my challenge to you this week is to memorize this verse, is to let it be the place that you start every day when it comes to facing fear. Because remember, you control the volume on fear. Now, maybe you need a little bit of help talking about or even identifying what it is that you're really afraid of. And maybe the volume on your fear is really loud, and you need someone to encourage you and to help you trust Jesus in the middle of it. Well, the good news is that's why when we meet in person, we have small groups. And that's why we have pastors and why we have adults who love you and who care about you. And that's why your parents and guardians are there. Is because we want to help you walk through circumstances or situations that may be causing you to be afraid. Now, these adults that we have here at the church and also your parents and guardians, these are people who care about you. These are people who are here to remind you that even though your circumstances may not change, you can walk through them with confidence and faith in Jesus, who's in control of all of it. So I'm so glad that you took the time to have this conversation with us this week. Because remember, you control the volume on fear. Well, thank you so much for checking out part 3 of our series, Your New Playlist, as we talk about how to change the soundtrack in your mind. And again, we hope that you would join us in person. We meet on Sunday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m. in the youth room at New Hope Church. We'd love to have you come and join us in person, and we'd love to connect with you as we work through this, as we help you change the pattern of the playlist in your mind, as we help you develop more positive mindset, to help you work through things, including the fears in your life. Have a great and wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to see you soon.